It is April 1945. A boy of 15 kneels behind a barricade of rubble in the heart of Berlin. In his hands is a Panzerfaust, a single-shot rocket almost as long as he is tall. 3 days ago he was in a classroom. Tonight he has been told to stop the largest army on Earth. A few streets away, in a flooded cellar that smells of damp concrete and fear, his mother sits in the dark with strangers, listening to the ceiling shake. They are two among nearly 3 million people trapped inside a dying city. 60 kilometers to the east, 2.5 million Soviet soldiers wait for the order to advance. They have crossed 1,000 miles of their own burned country to reach this place, and they have not forgotten what was done to them. In 16 days, the capital of Hitler's 1,000-year Reich will fall. This is how it ended. By April 1945, the war in Europe was almost over, but the last chapter would be one of the bloodiest. The Red Army had reached the Oder River in January, just 60 kilometers from Berlin. Soviet propaganda called the city the lair of the fascist beast, and Joseph Stalin was determined to take it before his Western allies could. Even after General Eisenhower assured him the Americans would not march on Berlin, Stalin did not believe him. He ordered the final assault weeks ahead of schedule. He handed the task to two rival marshals, Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev, and let them race each other for the prize. Against them stood the shadow of an army. On paper, 1 million men. In truth, many were exhausted veterans, half-trained boys, and old men of the Volkssturm, handed a rifle and sent to the front. Their commander, General Gotthard Heinrici, was one of the finest defensive minds in the world, but even he could see the truth. There was no stopping what was coming. On April 16th, at first light, the earth itself seemed to tear open. Thousands of Soviet guns opened fire along the Oder, one of the heaviest bombardments in history. Then Zhukov tried something theatrical. He switched on 140 searchlights to blind the defenders, but the beams caught the smoke and dust, and instead of blinding the Germans, they lit up his own advancing soldiers like targets on a stage. The defenders had pulled back beyond the shell fire and survived. Now they waited on high ground called the Silo Heights, and they cut the attackers to pieces. Soviet tanks bogged down in soft earth and choked the few narrow roads. Under crushing pressure to win fast, Zhukov made a fatal choice. He threw his tank armies into the traffic jam, and the slaughter only grew. For 3 days, the Red Army clawed its way up the slopes. A tank crewman named Goglidze felt a German shell strike his turret. A horrifying hit shook our tank. I turned the tank to the left, added speed, and hit the Germans with the treads. Silo cost at least 33,000 Soviet lives in 3 days, but the line broke. April 20th was Hitler's birthday. It was also the day both Soviet fronts broke into open country and turned toward Berlin, racing to surround it. In his concrete bunker beneath the city, Hitler raged at generals who could no longer help him, ordering counterattacks by armies that no longer existed. Around him, the leaders of the Reich quietly slipped away. Himmler, Goering, Speer, in a scramble the Germans bitterly nicknamed the Flight of the Pheasants. The people left behind had no such escape. As a column of German troops retreated through her village, Frieda Schultz asked whether she should flee with them. The answer was simple: you must be tired of life. On April 25th, the ring closed. Berlin was completely surrounded. At the same time, far to the west, Soviet and American soldiers met and embraced on the banks of the Elbe at Torgau. The two halves of Europe's war had finally touched. For everyone trapped inside Berlin, there would be no rescue. There was only the city and the fire. Inside the encircled city, 2.7 million civilians were trapped. No one had tried to evacuate them. They lived underground now, in cellars, subway tunnels, and the vast concrete flak towers, packed together in the dark while the world above them burned. One woman wrote in her diary, "Officially, it's called a shelter. We called it a cave, an underworld, a catacomb of fear, a mass grave." This was the moment the war turned back on the nation that had begun it. Many German soldiers fought on out of pure terror of the enemy and of their own side, who hanged deserters on the lampposts as a warning. One of them wrote, "If the others win and do to us only a fraction of what we have done in the occupied territories, there won't be a single German left in a few weeks." He was right to be afraid. As the Red Army flooded into the city, it took a terrible revenge on the people of Berlin, and tens of thousands of women suffered most of all, in crimes their commanders dismissed and history nearly buried. The sins of a nation were being paid by its weakest. To take the center of Berlin, the Red Army fought the way it learned in the ruins of Stalingrad, small teams of infantry, engineers, and flamethrowers blasting forward, one building, one cellar, one staircase at a time. It was slow, and it was savage. Every canal and railway station became a battlefield. But even in those final hours, the killing could falter. A young German named Helmut Altner looked up from his trench to find a Soviet tank idling a few feet away. The hatch opened, and a head appeared. "Soldiers, there is no point. Do you want to die in the final hours of the war that you have lost?" The hatch closed, the motor roared, and the tank clanked off. He was one of the lucky ones. The Red Army's true prize stood at the heart of the city, the Reichstag, the burned-out husk of Germany's parliament, now the great symbol of the enemy. Soviet soldiers stormed it in a brutal 3-day fight, and on the 1st of May they raised the red banner over its shattered roof. The beast's lair had fallen. Deep beneath the city, the man who had started it all refused to see it end. To the last, Hitler demanded news of rescue armies that existed only in his mind. On April 30th, he married Eva Braun, and then the two of them took their own lives. The next day, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and his wife murdered their 6 children and then killed themselves. As the bunker emptied, desperate soldiers tried to break out through the Soviet lines. A tank commander named Georg Diers never forgot that road. Anyone wounded had to be left behind. Many of them begged for a hand grenade or a bullet in the head. An ambulance truck ahead of me was hit. The wounded clung to the sides, screaming. It was a terrible sight. Finally, on May 2nd, 1945, General Helmut Weidling surrendered the ruins of Berlin to the Red Army. The battle was over. The Reich that was meant to last 1,000 years had lasted 12. In 16 days of fighting, at least 80,000 Soviet soldiers were killed taking Berlin. Perhaps 100,000 Germans died defending it, and tens of thousands of civilians, the old, the young, the ones who never chose any of it, died in the cellars and the streets. On May 8th, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over. For the soldiers of the Red Army, it was the end of the great patriotic war, the long road home, and the reckoning they had marched 1,000 miles to take. For the survivors of the camps, it was the end of a nightmare. And for the boy with the Panzerfaust and his mother in the cellar, if they lived, it was the beginning of a silence that would last the rest of their lives. The guns fell quiet over Berlin, and the longest war the world had ever known was finally, mercifully, done.